down there when he pops up. And another one is a friend of ours that we met when he was visiting across the pond from England, and that's Dan Farnworth. And Dan will definitely express where he comes from and his background. Both are familiar with our CIT program, and look forward to hearing your information and sharing what they have to do with trauma and our three-piece series of the webinar. If you have any questions about CIT, my website is up underneath my name, and my email if you need to contact me. Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you. So without any further ado, Dan, would you like to kick off and talk about who you are and why you come to this and what you have to offer?
Absolutely. Thank you, Vicki. Good afternoon or good evening, depending whereabouts you are. I know we have people from all over the world, really, from Scotland all the way over to New Jersey and a few bits in between as well. I'm Dan Farnworth. I'm a paramedic who is based in Scotland. I came to know the guys at the CIT in New Jersey through my Winston Churchill Fellowship, which is a program based on Winston Churchill's theory that you could travel to learn and return to inspire. So I was certainly inspired when I travelled, and the work you guys are doing is fantastic. And I think it's important that we keep these conversations going to try and continue the conversation and to really try to engage people. So when Vicki and Ed approached me and asked what can I do, what can we do together to engage people, especially during these really strange times that we're currently living in, we came up with the idea of the webinar. So I was sat and I wrote a few drafts out of things I could say, but I thought, maybe the best thing I can do is just take you through the journey of my career, and I think that will kind of paint the picture of what we're trying to achieve. So I started working as a first responder. Now, before I go any further, I will say there are a few differences in dialect, which I picked up really quite quickly when I went to the USA. When I asked somebody where the toilet was, they kind of, they frowned and said, "What do you mean?" So if I say things that are kind of out of dialect, bear with me. Similarly for the people in the UK, if I sound like I'm turning all American, I really do apologise. That does happen quite a lot. I blame Ed for that one. So my career started when I was 18 years old, and I started working answering the 999 calls, equivalent to 911, obviously here in the UK, which was quite a big undertaking for somebody who's 18 years old. And so I've just been thrown. I've just seen something on somebody. It looks really lovely and warm there. It's raining in England. So basically, working answering the 999 calls was really difficult because, it was a great job. We was able to help people, but it was intense. It was job after job after job. And quite often what you do is you're listening to the calls when you answer them. And it's a little bit like reading a book. Your mind paints a picture of what is going on, and it paints this picture. And often, the reality is not as bad as what you're imagining in your mind. So that was quite a difficult thing to grasp, and it took me a really long time to get used to that. And I think it's often an aspect that is forgotten about when we talk about first responders. Of course, we do have the first responders on the other end of the telephone. That's often lost. From there, I moved on to become an ambulance technician, or an EMT, as it's known in the US, which kind of gave me the underpinning skills and experience to develop and become a paramedic. I always remember my first job working on the road, as we call it, was we was dispatched to a hot air balloon crashed into an electricity pylon, and I was as white as a sheet. We shot there, and we got there as quick as we could, and thankfully it wasn't. It missed the electricity pylon. But I remember sitting there driving back, thinking, "Oh my, is every job going to be just like this? And this is the best job. It's going to be like this all the time. It's going to be so exciting." And of course, the reality is there's a lot more to the job. Really, there's a lot of different aspects that you deal with as first responders. You're not just dealing with the trauma that makes it onto the news. You're dealing with lots of little medical problems, lots of life traumas, and a whole variety of different emergencies, which you know, it takes a unique person to be able to comprehend that and to deal with that aspect of society that we don't normally see. I'll always remember the first dead body that I saw, which before this point, I'd only ever seen one dead body, which was a family member in an open casket. And it was really difficult because I was scared to touch this body when we was dispatched to it. And one thing I took from that straight away was the way my colleagues were behaving around this body. And what they were doing was the most respectful and beautiful thing I've ever seen. They was treating this person with the utmost respect and dignity. They closed the eyes of the patient to make it look like they were sleeping. So when the family came in, they could see that this person was, at peace, as it were. And I think, that kind of, for me, instantly underpins the people who we work with and our colleagues. And that is why we're in this profession. We're in this profession because we are caring people. And that culture kind of thrives throughout all the first responders, whether you're in law enforcement, the ambulance service or the fire service or the prison services. I think you're in there because you want to make a difference. And I think for me, that initial incident really shone through. And of course, there's the stories like that, but there's also the funny stories as well. Or I say funny stories loosely, but the funnier kind of aspects of the job. And I'll always remember one incident we was called to whereby there was flies inside of a window. The mail was piling up behind the door. And the mailman had called the ambulance because he thought, obviously, somebody may have passed away inside the house. And when we went into the house, we was greeted by flies, and the armed response police turned up, and we was following them into the property. And we eventually walked into the front room. She wasn't there. Eventually we found somebody laid in the bed, and she was still. She was emaciated, and we was all giving each other the nod to say that actually, this is quite sad. Somebody may have passed away here. At which point this lady sat up and shouted, "What are you doing in my house?" And the police officer I was working with screamed as loud as I've ever heard anybody scream before. And although we laughed about it, it kind of showed the camaraderie as well. And quite fascinating with that incident, actually, that the lady had kind of locked herself away from society. She was scared of society and the way things were turning out, which highlighted really kind of a social deprivation. But, although you're dealing with something that was kind of funny to a degree, it was still really upsetting to see somebody living in such a way. And then I suppose the other aspect of the job is the incidents that some may class as a waste of time. And I remember getting dispatched to an anaphylaxis incident. And this patient was full on anaphylaxis according to the dispatch notes. When we arrived, it was just a simple nettle sting. Or the time that somebody called because they had a cast on their arm and their arm was itchy and they wanted us to take it off. So, I mean, you're dealing with that kind of stuff as well, which becomes frustrating, and it really kind of can get you quite angry at times as well. And then I suppose that's underpinned by the reason why we do the job, which is the heartwarming stuff, the bread and butter work, as it were, which is the heartwarming stuff. And there's one heartwarming incident that stands out to me and I will never forget, which was a 90-plus-year-old lady we attended who was having a stroke, and she was very scared. She didn't want to go to hospital, but we knew it was the best option for her. And what we actually did with this lady was we spoke to her, and it turned out she worked in a munitions factory making ammo during World War II, and she had a fascinating life story. And to try and engage with her, we sat down and we sang Vera Lynn, We'll Meet Again. And we sang it all the way to hospital, and she had an absolute blast. Although she was very unwell, we actually managed to have a blast. And again, that highlights why we do the job. But there are them incidents that really do stay with you. And for me, there was one incident whereby we were sent to a child, and the details of which I'll not divulge because they're not the nicest to stomach. But ultimately, it was a child that had been murdered, and it was really difficult. And straight away, after attending this incident where this tragic scene had greeted us, I knew that it was going to be difficult to deal with. And I went home from work. I went home early that day. Now, there's questions whether that was the right thing to do, but I did. I went home early, and that night I couldn't sleep. I just could not sleep. And eventually I became more withdrawn. Got into a deeper and darker place. I wasn't discussing life with my colleagues. I was withdrawn from my family. And the best way of describing it is I felt like I was at the bottom of a deep, dark hole with the world passing by above my head. And it was a scary place to be. And I didn't know how to get out of that position. And the thing that really scared me was that maybe my colleagues would think that I'm not suitable for the job. Maybe I should, I was scared that I would feel not respected anymore. But eventually I managed to reach out for help, and I got the help that I needed. And I was diagnosed with PTSD. And when I went into work following the counselling and my doctor's appointments, one thing that really struck me is how great my colleagues were. They really came on board. They really helped support me, and they all gathered around. And actually, I realised that it was nothing to be ashamed of in the first place, and that actually a problem shared is a problem halved, because once I displayed what you could say was my sign of weakness, which actually isn't a sign of weakness, and I'll come on to that shortly. But once I displayed that, people started opening up and people started talking to me about their problems. And it became quite therapeutic for me to discuss it with them. And I'm sure it was therapeutic for them too. I now refer to that period of my life not as post-traumatic stress disorder. I refer to it as post-traumatic resilience. It's made me a stronger person. It's made me more able to deal with the horrendous things we see at work. It's made me more able to support my colleagues. And I think ultimately it's made me a better clinician. Well, I like to think it has done anyway. And I suppose that's kind of my personal journey. And I suppose what I'm trying to say about that is I think our colleagues are the greatest people that we've got. They're our greatest asset. They can help us, they can support us because they do the job. They are great. And if needs be, yeah, we can refer, we can get better support. So after all this, I ended up putting a blog out and ultimately ended up writing a book, which Ed's just got a copy of, so I'm hoping he's enjoying the read. One thing that I really noticed when I started sharing my blog and my story is that people really started engaging with me, and more people were coming to me saying, Dan, and I'll refer you to one paramedic who I looked at as the hardest, most hard-faced paramedic I've ever seen in my life. Nothing ever affected him. He picked up a copy of my story, and I remember I was sat there and he was reading it, and I felt nervous inside because I thought he was going to turn around to me and say, "What's this rubbish?" He turned around to me after that when he read it. He looked at it and he said, "Dan," he said, "this is fantastic." He says, "It's about time somebody started talking about the problems that we have." And then he started telling me about the problems he'd had in his life. And actually, once that stigma had been reduced and that pathway, he knew it was an acceptable conversation to have, it started changing everything. And of course, with the Winston Churchill Fellowship, I managed to meet lots of wonderful people. And, I discovered peer support is massive. And I think, I'm perhaps one of the biggest supporters of the peer support kind of model. But there are other things out there as well. And I certainly know in the UK, there's a lot of emphasis around supporting colleagues post-traumatic incidents. So kind of post-traumatic incident with models called TRIM, which is Traumatic Response Incident Management, or CISM, which is Critical Incident Support Management, similar models, and they're being rolled out across the board too, which is great. But one thing I think we do need to highlight, and I think will become evident in the later episodes of what we have planned here, is that it's not just about PTSD and the trauma that we see, but what we're trying to say is actually trauma is the most obvious aspect of mental health issues that you would imagine with a first responder. So that's why we're starting, I suppose, with the trauma aspects of it. But there are other issues out there too. And I genuinely believe that actually we need to start looking at a strategic level what we can do to support staff as well. And there's a lot of fantastic work going on out there. So I'm really looking forward to to hearing of some, some of the work that's going on and opening networks and looking at how we can share ideas. And, one thing I have realized when I was traveling around America, and certainly in the UK, is that we often try and reinvent the wheel. And actually, these models are already created. They're out there. We just don't know they're out there. So that's why something like this is really exciting. We can open that network and we can open that dialogue together. But I would say that all is said and done. I've highlighted some really difficult incidents. I've highlighted some kind of what I would class of more humorous incidents. But ultimately, being a first responder, working for the emergency services, is probably the most rewarding job in the world, and I wouldn't do anything else. And I think we need to recognize that and actually look at how we can just make sometimes small changes to make it a much more wonderful place to work. And yeah, by working together, I genuinely think that we can create real change. So I look forward to doing that and watching this grow. Over to you, Vicky.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you for adding some of those wonderful thoughts. Can you, just before we switch over with Mike, can you maybe comment a little bit on what you've seen with COVID and how that's affected the people
of course
over?
I can. I'm sorry, I did miss that bit off actually, and it's quite it's a very important point. So COVID's been, for me, and I would imagine for a lot of first responders, something that kind of crept up on us. Our training is vast. There's a lot of things we learn. There's a lot of things we get taught, whether you're working in law enforcement or in the medical world or the fire, whatever you're working in, there's a lot you get taught. But pandemics wasn't really on the list of tuition choices that we received. So it kind of snuck up on us a little bit. And I think, in my opinion, not everybody, but there's lots of different ways that people have responded or reacted. I think we've got a lot of people who are genuinely scared about it, and they've seen the worst possible impact of this pandemic. And I think there's other groups of people who haven't necessarily been affected of it directly, but they're still not sure how to deal with it. And I still don't know if we've got that kind of down in writing yet. I don't think there's any actual plan of what to do in a pandemic or how to respond. So we're still although we've learned a lot over the last few months, I think we're still doing a lot of learning. But I would say for me that some of the biggest effects for me on the front line is when you talk to your patient. I often treat people with a smile. A smile can fix 1,000 things, and I genuinely believe that. And actually, when we're turning out to people and we've got our masks on, the smile's gone. And I think that makes a big difference. It genuinely does. And who knows? It's kind of untested ground. And for my money, when the pandemic's over, if the pandemic's over, will people then sit and reflect, or will people be glad it's over, and will it be in the past, and will it be done? And I think for my money, it's really untested ground, and we don't know where we're going to be. But that's why it's great to be having these conversations, to see what other people think and to see what we can put in place to really have the foundations in place to support people if we need to do that in the future. And of course now.
Thank you, Dan. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and Mike Soma has a wealth of information, and he can tell you a little bit about his background, and we'll listen to what Mike has to say. Mike.
Okay, hope everybody can hear me. Thank you for joining the webinar today. Again, my name is Mike Soma. I'm a Jersey City firefighter. I've been with Jersey City Fire Department for about 23 years now. I've been in the fire service for over 25 years. I also was an EMT instructor, taught a lot of underwater search and recovery, water rescue programs. So that's where my background comes from. I am also involved with the New Jersey CIT program through Hudson County. And I'm also the safety officer for Meadowview Psychiatric Hospital in Secaucus, New Jersey. And thankfully, that has given me a wealth of knowledge now and experience in mental health crisis and dealing with mental health issues. My background with peer support comes from several years ago. I was involved in northern New Jersey with a team which has now been disbanded, actually right after 9/11. the Jersey City Fire Department a few years ago decided that we were going to try to implement some type of peer support program. So the chief of department, who happened to be one of my bosses at the time, said, listen, you have some background in this. Would you like to be involved? So we sat down and we kind of springboarded a program up for peer support within the Jersey City Fire Department. At the same time, the PFA&J, the Professional Firefighters Association of New Jersey, Dominic Marino, who actually passed away this year during COVID-19, not from COVID-19, he actually reached out and said, hey, listen, we really want you to be involved with this, and would you be interested? And I said, absolutely, it's needed. So I kind of took the mantle, and now I have a great team of people who are supportive of it, who work with me and provide peer support throughout the state of New Jersey to firefighters within the Professional Firefighters Association of New Jersey. During COVID-19, one of Dominic's things before he passed, actually 2 days before he passed away, was we happened to have many first responders from all over the country here in New Jersey helping us out with our emergency response to COVID-19. And he was greatly concerned about their overall mental health during the response, being away from home, in an unknown area, with people that they weren't familiar with, working with a hospital system that they weren't familiar with, not to mention the fact the COVID-19 related fears and anxieties that everybody else was experiencing, and the number of calls, the increased number of calls that they were dealing with. So we opened it up to help support the first responders who came into the state of New Jersey to help out during the COVID-19 emergency, which, as we know, is still going on. So to get down to some of the importance of peer support, which is the mainstay of everything that we're kind of working for, or working towards, is that we have come a great deal further than we've ever been. I think the dialogue for dealing with mental health emergencies and people recognizing when they need help and when to ask for help we've come so far in that. A lot of people, when we started our programs, both within the Jersey City Fire Department and within the state, were like, it's not, and it proved that that's not true. Members within both organizations use it. I get phone calls from volunteer fire departments looking for help. So people know it's there. And the important thing is that you have to set up some type of program as soon as possible. And if you can't set up a program for your organization, the important thing is have a plan. This is no different than being a EMT, a paramedic, a fireman, a police officer. No matter what your involvement in public safety is, that you have to have a plan. It's too late to come up with a plan for what you're going to do when there's a problem, when you have that call that you're really struggling with. If you don't have anything in place, it's going to be really hard when you're in it trying to get help. So it's really important to have a plan in place. And one of the funny sayings that in the fire service we always know is a plan is great until you get hit in the face. Well, it's no different with this. If you have a plan, you have to make sure it works. Make sure that if you have a plan and you know that you have a peer support team available to you, that you reach out to somebody and you talk to them before there's an emergency, before there's a need for it. And a general conversation is a great way to start things. Hey, I don't click with that person. It's no different than if anybody's ever seen therapists or psychologists, psychiatrists. Sometimes you just don't click with people. And if you don't click and don't have a connection with that person, it's going to be hard to overcome that. So it's very important that not only have the plan, but make sure that before you have a crisis or before you find yourself in a situation, is that you set up some type of dialogue beforehand. I also happen to be involved with a group called Natal. They're out of Israel. The Urban Security Initiative brought that for the state of New Jersey. The UASI program actually brought Natal in to talk about resiliency. They have a resiliency program, which is a requirement. It's actually a requirement in Israel that every single citizen has to take resiliency training, and it starts at the grammar school level. And they go through the stages of it as they transition through life. So we were able to get a presentation by them of their program, and we sat down as first responders, and we developed a program that we felt, resiliency-wise, was going to work in the state of New Jersey. I happen to be involved on the fire side. There were people that were involved on the EMS side and people that were involved on the police side. But at the end of the program, I really felt that everybody was impacted. There were a lot of people who came there not thinking that it was going to have the impact that it did. And it really changed a lot of people's thought process on why we need resiliency, why we need to focus on it. And one of the things that we had originally brought up during the training was we felt that it's really important that we talk about resiliency and we talk about the need for peer support and what's available to our responders as soon as they actually start their career out. You know, it's hard. You know, Dan had mentioned it before. You know, you have somebody who's this hardened veteran of the emergency services, and you feel like you're going to try to overcome something. You feel like they're going to fight the system. They're not going to want to participate. They're not going to want to listen. And sometimes they do, but you find that after a while, they start coming around. Well, what if we start off our new EMTs, our new paramedics, our new firefighters, police officers, with some type of idea of what resiliency is, how to make that separation of work and home, how to talk about things, who they can go to, who they can talk to, set it up at the beginning of their career. And it's just going to help us out in the long run, because when it does happen, when the incident does come about, that somebody needs help, they'll have tools in their toolbox to go and use to hopefully not end up in a bad position. You know, unfortunately, the statistics wise, last July, one publication put out that the PTSD rate for EMS, it was a multinational census, 11% had PTSD, 15% said that they were suffering from some type of depression. That's 15% of first responders, EMS, saying that they were suffering some type of depression from what their job was exposing them to is big, and we need to address it, and we need to be there for these people. You know, this is a start. We have an enormous amount of people here today that are listening and are part of this conversation, and it's really important that we have programs available for them and that we can make that connection early on, because we don't want to see people developing substance abuse problems. We don't want thoughts of suicide or potential suicide, because as we all know as first responders, seeing the suicide rates among first responders climbing, it's concerning. You know, out of the Natal survey that they did with 230 participants, they were asked the question, based on your daily experiences as a first responder, how does the job hazards and life-threatening situations affect you and your colleagues? 35% said they had no effect. They had no effect that day. Go down the line in their career, they might develop a problem. It might be accumulative, going on bad call after bad call, and it at some point they will reach a breaking point. In doing this as a peer, going to fire departments, getting called in after these horrible tragedies, and sitting down with responders, a lot of time people say, you know, like I just mentioned, and Dan had talked about, is that veteran who never really seemed to have a problem. And then you get that bad call, and I get called in there, and you just see that they've had enough. They've had enough of not talking about it, of locking their family out of what they're dealing with, and it's detrimental. And you know that our families, the responses that we deal with, the thought process that we go to run after run, is this going to be, you know, one that's going to put me in danger? Is this one where I might get shot? They're concerns, and they're concerns that we need to address, deal with, and we need to have plans for. So going back to that question, Like I said, 35% said they had no effect. There was 68% that said there was some type of emotional effect. And over time, they say that through resiliency, that you start to break down that emotional effect. You feel like you have, it has less of effect on you. Physical effects, 24%. And organizational factors, meaning you didn't feel that your job was as supportive of you, 49%. So, you know, the numbers are there, and it's really important that we're having this conversation and talking about the stresses and how to handle them, and doing it now. First responder stresses. We always deal, you know, besides the call stresses that we have to deal with, there's the other ones. The high level of stress makes them, you know, making impaired decisions or bad decisions because we're so focused on other things that are going on. Sorry, you might hear a tone. I happen to be in the firehouse today, so it's it might get loud. Number of responses that we have to deal with. Sometimes we just have bad days where it's call after call. And everybody dealing with COVID-19, you know that the increased call volume that you've had to deal with, not to mention the fact the importance of PPE. Did your job have enough PPE available for everybody to wear? That raises a stress level. Am I wearing the proper equipment? Is it a fake N95? Is it, there was, on the peer support side, the conversations that I was having with people, it was really, really hard to listen to responders, and they said they didn't feel their jobs were taking it seriously. They weren't pushing for proper equipment. Those are real fears that needed to be addressed, and it was really hard for them because they felt like they weren't being taken seriously. You know, and then you get the other stresses of pay, hours, the bad call that you get. They feel underappreciated. Right now, if you live in the United States, it's definitely a very unique situation going on. And first responders are starting to feel some of the impact of what's going on. Work and family. You know, one of the old timers that I remember, I came on the job, it said, you know, home is home and work is work, and leave the two separate. And I always say, whenever I go out and teach programs on peer support, I always say that is the biggest crock ever, because what happens here affects home, and what happens at home can affect here. We hope that EMTs, paramedics working together in the field, you know each other, you know how each other reacts, what your usual life is like, you know when something is off. And the biggest thing is having the wherewithal to say, hey, is something going on? I'm really worried about you. That is the biggest conversation that anybody could ever have. You know, is saying, is everything okay? And if you don't feel you're the right person, saying, listen, I'm worried about you. I'd like you to speak to somebody. And maybe you have that plan set up and you actually can help somebody else. So some of the COVID-19 stuff before we jump into some questions, some of the stuff that I had gotten from responders that I was talking with during this emergency was obviously their concern about exposure, their own exposure, if they had pre-existing conditions and how it might affect them, and the fact that they had to deal with these emergencies. And at the same time, they were worried about what was going to happen to them if they got it. For some of us, it was family risk to family. I happen to have a spouse. My wife is one of those at risk. So I constantly wear a mask, and people, you know, guys around me, they're not wearing masks all the time because we're here all the time. So I was taking it very seriously for her. So I was wearing a mask. I was staying away from her. I was living in a hotel for almost 3 months. But people were taking it seriously. And it wasn't just me. It were many other responders that I talked to. I got phone calls from police officers saying, hey, listen, can you help me? My job isn't helping me, and I need to stay away from my wife. She's going through chemotherapy. Again, another thing that needed to be addressed. And it was those of us that were in the peer services started taking care of getting these people, you know, rooms in hotels and, you know, Winnebagos to live in outside their homes. Some of the other things was the unknown. This virus is like one of those things nobody knows, and information changes on a daily basis. Don't wear a mask, wear a mask. You know, it was back and forth. It's always developing. So we have to stay with that. The way our agencies were handling it, and some of the other things were the way our coworkers were reacting to the situation, saying, it's all fake. Just, you get some of those people in it, and it doesn't help those who have actual fears over this COVID-19 pandemic. It doesn't help them at all. It doesn't really help their mental health, knowing that other people aren't taking it serious. So those were just some of the things on my end. I look forward to, talking with some of you, and if you have any questions, please feel free.
Mike, you and Dan both have, put out so much information that is what you're facing and what you've faced over the years, and that's really been helpful. I thought for a minute that before we take any questions, if anybody has any questions or comments, you can go ahead and type them in the chat box. But while they're doing that, I thought maybe Dan, did you have anything to remark on after Mike had spoken?
I think for me, Mike's hit the nail on the head. And I think, one thing that always strikes me is that Mike and myself, actually, we've never met, but we're on absolutely the same page. And you know what? This isn't an isolated problem to the United Kingdom or to New Jersey. This is a global thing. This is, it certainly exists in the US and in the UK. And I think it's something that we tend to say we're going to do a lot about, but how much do we really do? I think, there's a lot of people who are doing so much, which is great. But sometimes it's just that one thing, when you walk into a room in the morning and you say to somebody, "Morning, how are you?" And somebody replies, "Well, not so great." And you just, "Oh dear," and you walk on. You don't actually engage in that conversation. Maybe that person's trying to tell you something. So I suppose, having you can have the all singing, all dancing, you can have the best everything in the world to support your colleagues, but actually, it's sometimes, like Mike was saying, it's on that interpersonal level. It's about teaching people how to listen, how to talk, and what to do. And it doesn't need to be the most enhanced mental health first aid or psychological first aid course in the world. There is there's a starter level for everything. And I think, building into new recruits resilience training, building into yearly training of staff, a little bit of resiliency, plant the seed and the tree will grow. And I think also, it just amazed me how Mike's on exactly the same page, really. We both believe in resiliency. We both believe that the conversation on the shop floor is the most important. If the stigma is reduced, if people are prepared to feel open to talk about it, and let's have it right, stigma does play a big part in why people are scared of talking about mental health, of talking about the traumas. That is something that can really only be reduced on the shop floor, by the shop floor, if you know what I mean. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said there for that.
When we were planning this, I learned about Natal and talked about it, it seemed like there were so many great things. And when I hear you talk about it, Mike, it makes me realize that really is a good program. And if we could figure out how to kind of replicate some of that here. And then I was also reflecting on Dan when we had a conversation preparing for this. You had just recently moved to Scotland, and you were kind of comparing the differences between being in England and the difference in Scotland with the fact about peer support and mental health. So maybe if you all wanted to comment on those two things.
Yeah, I suppose I'll start if that's all right, Mike. I think one thing I've noticed that services, and I imagine, in fact, I know this is the same in the US from when I was over there, that some services are light years ahead of other services. Some services are trying to catch up. But the key is that something is being done. I think with the peer support stuff, it's really difficult. I mean, sometimes it gets stuck in the corporate world of, is this the right thing to do? How do we work into policy? What do we do this? How do we do that? So there's a lot of work to be done. But this is where we come down to not reinventing the wheel. And I think what Mike and his team are doing is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I think that the important thing is having some type of peer support team. Not every organization can go and start a peer support team, but having something when possible, grouping people together and putting a team together to assist other responders is a big thing. As far as Natal, like we were just talking about, they gave a lot of information. But the importance of the training, it took us, so when we designed the program, we actually said it's a 3-day class. So it's about 8 hours a day. But it's not what we're used to. So when we say, resiliency training, we're not talking about a Zoom training like this. We're not talking about sitting in a classroom where I'm up front and I'm talking and you're watching PowerPoint. We don't want death by PowerPoint. The program is a engaged program. We sit in a circle, we put things out there as instructors, and basically it's just a led conversation where we put out a point and then we talk about how each other has overcome things within our careers. I'll just give you an example. One of them being that separation. We go to work, as firefighters in New Jersey, in Jersey City, we do a 24-hour shift. And if my day is really bad here and I'm going to go home, I need to have some type of way to separate my job and what I went through that past 24 hours and going home to my family. And one of the next points is dealing with the family. But that disconnect could just be something as simple as not going home in my uniform. It could be taking my uniform off, putting on my civvies, putting on my street clothes, taking a shower and going and grabbing a cup of coffee or driving around a bit, listening to some music, whatever it might be, to kind of just disconnect a little bit from what 24 hours has done. And then the next thing is not locking out family. I find an enormous amount of us as first responders lock our family out. It has been, I know a lot of people used to say, don't expose your family to the stuff that you deal with. And that's 100% right. We don't need to traumatize our family. But at the same time, if we're dealing with something, if we had a really bad night, not telling our family, it's not helping them. It's making our lives harder, because now I'll just give you, for instance, I had a bad night one day in the firehouse. Something happened here, went home, and I grabbed the lawnmower and I was mowing the lawn. And my wife's at the door yelling at me. She's like, "Why are you mowing the lawn? You just mowed it like a day ago." I'm like, "I need to mow the lawn." And she just, instead of just stopping and saying, "Listen, I just need a minute, so I'm just going to mow the lawn, or I'm just going to sit outside to smoke a cigar, but I need to do that right now." Instead of just giving her a little heads up, I just did something, and then she started getting angry at me, and then I'm getting angry at her. And what is that situation doing? It's making it harder. It's putting more stress on us. So we need to not lock our families out. Be honest with them. The other thing is, the media is everywhere. Everybody's got a cell phone. Videos pop up on Facebook, Instagram, you name it. If something happened, you're better off talking to your family and saying, "Listen, something happened. I just want you to hear it from me. I don't want to give you all the gory details, but I'm just going to say it was bad, and I just need some time. I just need to go do something. I'm going to go talk to somebody. I'm going to de-stress. I'm going to whatever it is. But please don't lock your families out of what you're doing."
I think that's incredibly important, Michael. One thing that we did see on the Winston Churchill travels, as it were, was actually some services have friends and family booklets. And when you join the service, your friends and family are given this book. It's only a little, 5 or 6 pages pamphlet. But what that did is it said, take that home to your family, and you give that to your family. It says, your partner is now part of this amazing system that is there, emergency medical services, law enforcement, whatever. They're now part of this, and it's really great that they're in part of this. But it does take its toll. If this is how to engage in conversation with them. If they don't want to talk, this is what you can do. And if you're concerned, this is a number for their line manager. If you have any concerns, you can speak to them, or you can speak to their peer supporter. And I think, engaging them also, not just on a personal level, but making them feel part of this bigger bubble of the part of the service. They're part of, at the end of the day, if it wasn't for your family, you wouldn't be able to do the job you do, you know. And I think it's really important that we engage in them and keep family part of this too.
100% correct.
We also have a question. Do the staff that work in peer support, do they do that full time in a dedicated role, or do they do this in addition to their day jobs?
Well, my peers, they're actually all firefighters or fire officers within the state of New Jersey. So it is a true peer. It is we're not clinicians. We went through the International Association of Firefighters. We actually have our own mental health facility down in Maryland. You have to be a member of the IAFF to use it. And they put together a peer support program, and we went through a week-long program to become peers and to help our brothers and sisters out there that really need help.
Yeah, and I think I declare an interest here. Me and Alison are actually work for Scottish Ambulance Service, and Alison is doing a great job trying to head up change within the organisation. They're doing a lot of work on this. But just to piggyback what you said there, Mike, I mean, there are some services that do it as full-time jobs and it works really well. But similarly, there's other services that people do this ad hoc as part of their day job, and it also works really well. But I think one thing that really needed to be recognised was that regardless of whether they are doing this full-time or on a addition to their own role, they need time to train, they need time to engage with the peers. So the service that they're working for needs to invest in the staff, and the service needs to give the staff the opportunity to fulfill the role, because otherwise, you know, you're back to the old scenario of put your own oxygen mask on first before helping others. We've all heard that when we've been on the aeroplane, and it's incredibly important. We must do that. So we've got to be careful we don't put our peer supporters under too much strain and pressure too. So we've got to look after them, and we've got to really invest in their time, whether it's full-time or part-time that they do it.
Here's a really good question too. Plan, or is there anything in place to support the spouses of first responders?
We do have stuff in the state of New Jersey. We're putting together a program to actually go out. We did get called by one fire department who wanted us to assist after an incident happened. They wanted us to talk to the spouses. So we went and did a little program where we talked about the stresses of the job, how to talk to a first responder, their loved ones, about things that are going on in their lives. So there is stuff available. For the PFA&J, we're trying to build that up a little bit more. We're trying to put more together for family outreach. Like Dan had mentioned, you know, bringing them in and saying, listen, these are the people that you can reach out to. If you have questions, if you see something going wrong, if you notice their use of alcohol is growing, if you notice that they just seem really disconnected from family and from life, that you can call us and we'll help you and them through this whole thing. And that really is an important part. And again, going back to that whole, you know, new candidates starting out in their first responder career is at the academy level, those academy classes, bringing the families in and doing a program for them right away to say, listen, these are some of the stresses that your loved one is going to be going through, and these are some ways that you can help them, and these are some things we really need you to look out for. And when you start to see these, you need to pick up a phone and call us. So.
Yeah, and I think I'll piggyback that as well. I think one of the greatest things I saw was in Ottawa. They actually had their spouses and families come in, and it was called a thank you day, and the service invested, they put a big spread on for them. The other people that weren't invited were actually the employees. There's an opportunity to thank the family and to get them involved. And actually, there was an underhidden message there. The peer support team was there to give them the talk that Mike discusses. But in other services, I did see it actually done with the grassroots people on the shop floor who had different programs in place, not quite peer support models, but they were kind of models of stigma-free zones, or whatever we want to call it. And what they did is they had like little groups of people with different interests, and there was groups of people out, they called them the family liaison team, And basically what they did is they organised barbecues, they organised their station open days, they organised events at Christmas where Father Christmas would come into station to see all the kids, and it just engaged the family. And so, you know, there are ways about it. There's many different models in place, but as Mike says, I think it's incredibly important that we do engage with the families as much as possible, because they underpin who we are and how well we're supported.
Vicky, be real quick. I just wanted to say, we're talking about EMS, but I wanted everybody to know on the law enforcement side that this year we started a resiliency program for law enforcement in New Jersey. And hopefully we'll get a lot of numbers and stats for that we can break off and peer for the EMS and fire services off of that. Like Mike and Dan know, it's kind of like the services, the military services, all the branches bust each other's chops a little bit, but we all work together when it comes down to it. And that's what's great about with Mike being a part of the CIT steering committee. He brings a different aspect in it, but we all work together. And you guys were asking about the booklets and stuff like that for family. Some of our academy classes have, there's a nice book out there for my law enforcement, and hopefully we'll get something together for firefighters and EMTs. It's called Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. And some of our police academies hand that out to family members on what to see and what to expect from their loved ones as they go through their career. Everybody talks about, you know, going through their, you know, even on the first responders and EMTs, they talk about all this stuff, but they don't talk about, you know, taking your own life or suicidal thoughts and depression. That never really enters at the first. Everybody's so excited. So it's good that they have that reading and education. But hopefully from the resiliency program that law enforcement have, we can branch off and everybody join in on that aspect. So they're definitely, like Dan and Mike say, there's definitely different programs out there, and it's always good, police to police, fire to fire. We can relate to each other.
Thanks, Ed. Denise has a question too, and I also want to just recognize, I'll go to the question in 1 second, because we're getting to the top of the hour. We are going to stay for a few more minutes and answer the rest of the questions. Carolyn, who's been helping me host, is going to put up some slides for some further information on our two speakers and how you can contact them. And this, again, is the first part of a 3-part series. And hopefully today we're talking about the stresses that everyone's seeing. And then we will move on to, like, what are some of the other options that people can use for the stresses, and also some model programs. And there goes my phone. So I'm going to turn this back. The question from Denise was, have you...
I can get it, Vic.
Thank you.
The joys of working from home, or I guess remotely, as we're all in different places. Ed, I'm sure you can answer this. Hannah asked, are you providing CEUs for the resiliency training?
So as CIT, we haven't done that as of yet. For our resiliency for law enforcement, just so you know how that works, each department for law enforcement is supposed to have a resiliency officer assigned. So the officers that are having trouble on a bad day or have a bad call are supposed to be able to go to these officers in confidence and be able to speak to them and then be referred to what they need. We haven't established the training yet, but that's definitely something we could look forward to planning something in the future. I know there are some programs out there, and Mike might be able to focus on this, that do offer CEUs in those areas. But as of now, I know CIT and us, we haven't done that yet. Mike, you know any?
Yeah, we have CEUs for our longer program, but we don't, the 3-day program, but we don't have anything for any shorter programs. Again, a lot of it has crept up on us, especially with COVID-19 pandemic, you know, having these webinars and programs, but we have not gotten any CEU approval yet. But hopefully we can, but the 3-day program does have CEUs.
That's all good stuff to know. I'm going to share the PowerPoint slide. We're going to continue talking, but in case anybody has to leave us, I want to make sure that we have all of these good resources up here. And then we can come up to our next question after that. Right, Vic?
Yes, Denise had asked earlier, have you noticed an increase in domestic violence incidences during the pandemic?
I think for my money, I can only talk from my point of view here. I wouldn't necessarily say I've noticed an increase, but I've noticed it's not gone away. You know, the difference is we're not going to the bar brawls anymore. We're not going to as many road traffic collisions anymore. So it's really hard to gauge, you know. But it's not gone away. It's a problem that still exists. But I don't know about you, Mike, or Ed.
Yeah.
It's hard to put a figure on that, really.
I agree with 100% with you. It's one of those things I haven't seen can't say we've seen an increase or decrease in it, but it still exists, still there. The numbers are pretty much the same. I haven't seen any data showing that there's a significant increase come out yet.
And I would agree with Mike and Dan on the law enforcement side that it still exists, but I haven't seen an increase in domestic violence because of this. Some people say that there might be even a decrease because by the time they get home, like, we're not going to the bars, we're not taking that, that high risk area of, hanging out, not going home and sharing. We actually are going back home because we want to go home and just see our loved ones. So some people think that it's lessened, but I don't see any stats on that.
And Jean just asked, what is the best training for someone who wants to volunteer as a peer support volunteer aside from a resiliency program?
Well, here in the States, the biggest thing would be, depending on where you are in the U.S., is trying to find a local peer support team. If there isn't a peer support team for EMS, fire service, because in the U.S. we do have the fire EMS marriage per se. So it would be definitely trying to find something locally. If something exists. If not, then it would be reaching out, especially if you're, somebody's in the International Association of Firefighters, which does have EMS in it, would be reaching out to the IAFF for assistance to help setting up some type of program.
I'll just piggyback that really and say here in the UK, it's kind of the same really. It's kind of on a local dependency. It depends what you've got in the area where you work. I mean, there was a lot of talk when I was in the US about kind of trying to join up, like Mike says, there's the International Firefighters Association, but trying to join up something where we can have some sort of international network where there's like a minimum training package that anybody can do quite quickly, but also where there's an opportunity to open dialogue in the form of a forum or something like that. And I still believe that's a great asset and a great idea. It's just get down and doing it really, which is easier said than done. There is something great in New Jersey, which I know the guys are incredibly proud of, which is the stigma-free zones. And we thought about utilising that as an opportunity to kind of have a stigma-free front line or something like that, to try and widen the dialogue and to give an opportunity for that minimum training for people who don't have it. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it's going to come in the future.
Wonderful. And again, it is at the 3 o'clock, and we wanted to be respectful of people's time. I can't thank both Mike and Dan enough for taking the time today and joining us. This is again a 3-part. We are going to do the next one on the 28th of July, and then again on the 4th of August. We will send out information to everyone that was registered, and we will be here for a few more minutes to take questions or comments if anybody else would speak or ask any questions. I know Robert has made a comment about the New Jersey DASA. The ASI is reporting increase in domestic violence through their call-in centers, also increases in alcohol consumption and substance abuse. So yes, there is definitely an uptick in all of that.
100% with the increase in alcohol consumption. It was something that a lot of us joke around about, is that the trips to the liquor store during COVID-19, you know, because we were sitting at home and it would be, okay, it's time to go outside and have a cigar and a drink. And it was something that even myself, I don't normally do, but when I was on vacation for 2 weeks, I was sitting there and I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm going to have a drink. So it did see an increase in alcohol consumption. So definitely a concern.
Ed, do you have any comments?
No, I would have to agree with Mike with that. I mean, we might have not been going to the local bars, but yeah, I mean, if you're on social media, you were even seeing it with parents being homeschooling your students. They were, you know, after a day at school, there was a drink out on the patio or something. So maybe it hasn't gotten to the level some of us for domestic, but it definitely changed some of our layouts. Maybe where we were going to be more physical, or we'd go out for a hike or a bike ride or something like that. We were all cooped up at home and we were like, what, like Mike said, what do I do? Yeah. You know, we're talking about personalities, and Dan and even our mental health folks that are here, we all got that personality where we can't sit still. We're always looking for something to do or someone to help. So when we had free time, like, what do I do? I'll go sit out on a patio with my wife and let's try the new wine from wherever.
Ed, this one's really directed, you can answer, are there any plans to hold CIP in Ocean County? I know that due to COVID, there have been cancellations thus far. I think all the counties are having that problem right now.
Yeah, so we just had our state meeting. Ocean County is a CIT program, does have a CIT program. Renee White from the prosecutor's office is our liaison for law enforcement on that. But most of our classes aren't starting up until about September, when we have a handle on, actually, believe it or not, our trainers are ready to go. It's the facilities. Where can we train and what the numbers are and what's the COVID safety aspects that we have to do, you know, space-wise, number-wise, and stuff like that. So yes, we are definitely starting back up, hopefully in September. And Ocean County is one of them. I think, you know, definitely be strong, and you can find that on our website.
And thanks to Carolyn, she has put up the slide that pretty much gives everybody's website, contact information. You can also you can find Dan's book on Amazon, which is, yeah, it's not on there. It's actually was on the flyer that we sent out earlier. I'll send it out to everyone as we wrap this up.
It's on his website, and Ed is doing a fabulous Man of White right there.
Doing the show.
Thank you, Carolyn. I was trying to squint my old eyes.
I told Dan, no pressure, but Dan has a book, so Mike has to step up.
I don't know about that.
Well, Ed could write a book too, right, Mike?
Absolutely.
I don't have pictures.
It's so obvious that both of you have such a wealth of knowledge. I can't thank you enough for bringing it to us today and talking about this. Like we've all said, this is hopefully the first part of 3 parts that we can look forward to trying to come up with some real resources and some solutions for some of these things that we are seeing. So thank you so much for joining us. And we will be sending a follow-up information to everyone's email address. And if anybody else has any wrapping up comments.
I just want to thank you for collaborating with us, and I look forward to the next 2 webinars so that we can talk about some resources and things that are working here and across the pond. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining today.
Thank you.
So with that, with no more questions, I think we're going to end. And once again,